in his book Miracles, where he tries to kind of come to terms with some of this stuff, I can understand why someone like Baron von Strucker and the Doctor would look at something like the twins as a miracle and as horrifying, because we can't explain this. We're not entirely sure how this happened. Therefore, we don't know how to control it.
Yeah. Awesome. All right. Well, hey, let's try and bring this in for a landing here a little bit, because we've gone pretty long already. Is there anything else that you want to say to wrap this up?
I think that one of the really important things about Captain America, the Winter Soldier, that we'd be remiss to not at least mention is that it is one of the big linchpins in the larger Marvel universe, in the sense that the events of that movie actually alter the course of what happens in the first season of Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. back in 2013, 2014, around the time that the film came out, because at that time the storyline is kind of plodding along, and you're introduced to the team, and you're learning the team dynamics, and you're solving the mystery of how Phil Coulson came back to life. And just on the tail end of solving that, and Phil starting to grapple with the reality of what happened there, all of a sudden this organization that he has given his life to just drops out from under him. And in the episode right before the events of Winter Soldier that lead right into it, because Jasper Sitwell, who's in the Winter Soldier and is on the Numerian Star at the beginning, actually gets called away from working with Coulson's team to go to the Numerian Star in that episode before the events, and in the 2 episodes after the events of the Winter Soldier. Everything changes from Coulson for Coulson.
Well, and I think honestly that was sort of a pivot point for that series in general. I think it got a lot better after that.
Yep. And not only that, but that's where you begin to realize, oh my gosh, the events in these movies are actually affecting what I watch week to week on television.
That's pretty cool.
And there never has quite been that same kind of
interconnectivity,
synthesis of storytelling in continuity. Unfortunately, they kind of moved away from that in the last couple seasons, because the TV division and the movie division don't play as well together as we'd like.
And that is too bad. But there have been a couple of really cool nods, and we'll probably talk about that in different episodes. All right, so our next segment is Understand a Random Fandom. And we haven't had a lot of these yet because it's kind of tough to coordinate schedules across the ocean. But today the stars have aligned, and along with us we have my brother, a man who might actually be able to tell an archangel from a cherub, because we know things about the Bible and angels and so on.
Yo, it's me.
It is Joshua Vinalas. Hi, Josh.
Hello.
All right. So, Aaron, what do we have teed up for Joshua today? What are we going to try to explain to him?
Well, there's a comic book series out there from probably about 15, 20, 25 years ago called Archangels, the Saga. And it happens to be my favorite comic book series of all time. There's a quote from I think it's actually from Grant Morrison, who's a big time writer on Batman and the DC universe for the last 20, 30 years, who said something along the lines of, think about what your favorite comic book is, and then think about what you were reading in middle school, and see whether those two things happen to align. And in this case, they do, because I was first introduced to this this series in middle school by my best friend. It's a story of a 16-year-old teenage kid named Justin Griffin who happens to get in a car accident with his three best friends are in the car, and he's in the back seat. And the car accident happens actually after a high school party at someone's house. And the three best friends, they all die in the car accident, and he lives. And what you see happen as the story kind of goes forward is that there is this demonic force that essentially wants to ruin his life and kill him. And there's this group of angels that are sent to actually act as supernatural protection against this demonic force. And so the first issue is all about the car accident and kind of how that happens and sets all of that up. And then the second issue kind of details his experience in the hospital and how some of these evil demons essentially come to kill him in his sleep while he's in the hospital, but he's got this angel that's there to protect him. And the rest of the story is him kind of dealing with the aftermath of these events and dealing with the death of his friends, and how kind of what school and what life is like for him after all of this happens, and life kind of falls apart, and then eventually he has this positive spiritual experience that begins to kind of turn his life around. And through all of it, there's all this stuff going on kind of supernaturally behind the scenes that culminates in a big battle between some characters who kind of pop in and out.
So, Aaron, what is there to like in this series for somebody who doesn't have any context really in geek culture?
Well, that was a pretty solid explanation already, I must say. I mean, that was got me on the edge of my chair. But sorry, I interrupted. Go ahead, Aaron.
Yeah, I think part of it is you don't necessarily need to be familiar with any mainstays of geek culture to understand aspects of this story, because it's not DC, it's not Marvel, it's not Vertigo or any of kind of the companies that tend to produce geek culture material. It's a little independent company that essentially came up with a story and said, we want to examine what life might be like for a teenage kid who is going through, life and has these things happen to him that for a lot of people are very, very real, but we also want to examine the possibility of there being unseen forces behind the scenes actually manipulating the events in this individual's life. And for the guys who actually created the story, if you ask them, they're very honest about part of their thrust and part of their purpose in the story was to essentially give a framework through comic books to where somebody might be able to essentially encounter the story of Christianity through the events that this main 16-year-old character goes through.
Wow, that's really, really cool.
So even for somebody who isn't like into comic books necessarily, but is interested in spiritual things, this might be a good way to like get them to engage with some of those questions.
This would be an absolute excellent way for them to engage with some of those questions.
Okay, so Joshy, based on this, on a scale of 1 to 10, how likely do you suppose you might be if you saw an issue of Archangels the Saga laying around somewhere? Would you be more likely at this point to pick it up and actually look at what was going on there?
Wait a sec. Stop criticizing the non-geek person. You let Aaron give a 5-minute solid speech pitch about what this is, and then you give me a 1 to 10 scale question? Like, I'll only have to say a number?
Feel free to expand on that to any degree that you would like. I'm just trying to give you a framework in which to work here.
Solid discrimination is what that is. Anyways, I honestly, my thoughts are, I'm pretty engaged. Aaron, I think you did a really good job explaining that, actually, and kind of opening that up in an interesting way. Yeah, I mean, I would give it a solid 8, and I mean, an 8 because I think that from where I am right now in Estonia, I think there's a lot of people, especially young people, struggling with topics like we were talking about before, and I think it would be a good way to help them maybe get rid of some of those problems and take a step towards something that'll actually give them purpose and give them freedom from things that are really eating them up inside.
All right, so there we go. That's Archangels the Saga. Maybe we'll drop a link to some kind of. Do they have a website, Aaron? Is some of that stuff available online?
I think you might be able to still find sets of the issues on Amazon, but it's not the easiest thing to find these days.
Mm-hmm.
Aaron, you can just say what your address is, and people can pop by and take a look at the collection.
So we're going to wrap things up here with just a very little bit of guaranteed good news. And honestly, this is not a piece of good news that is especially conducive to an audio format, but it is really, really awesome. And I strongly urge you to check out the link that I'm going to put in the show notes for this, because you're gonna be blown away, and I hope a little bit inspired by the story that this video tells. So yeah, I won't say a whole lot more about that because again, it would just detract from your experience of seeing it. But that's gonna wrap it up for us here on this episode of Two Geek Soup. Aaron, thanks for hanging out with me again here tonight. As always, it was a pleasure.
Absolutely, man. Anytime.
All right. Well, you can contact me in a variety of ways. Our Facebook page is 2geeksoup. I'm on Twitter at 2geeksoup. The email address is 2geeksoup@gmail.com. And I think we even have an Instagram, too. I don't really know what that's for yet, but what I'm told is that the more social media you can be engaged on, the better. So we've got an Instagram, too. Two Geek Soup is recorded at Soundmind Studios and produced by Lee Earnhardt. And even though it probably makes me the apathetic hall monitor, this podcast is a proud member of the More Than One Lesson faculty.